Good morning and welcome to the AWS Public Sector Summit Singapore. I'm your room host, Sally. We have lots of good sessions in store for you today. As you move between sessions, please take your seats promptly to ensure speakers are able to start on time. We're pleased to advise you that all AWS sessions you see today are being recorded and will be available after the event. If you would like to access the slides today from any sessions, please approach one of our staff and tap your badge on the touch point at the front of the room after each session. Finally, all of you have a QR code on the back of your badge. You can use this, or the URL, to provide feedback on any session you see here today. We would love to hear from you. With your help, we promise to always look for better ways to run these events. In addition, we will be randomly generating a winner per session from the submitted feedback pool, who will walk away with a limited edition swag. Winners will be announced at 1 p.m., 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. respectively in the rooms. I would now like to introduce you to our first speaker, Craig Fox, Cloud Executive Advisor, Worldwide Public Sector, Professional Services, AWS. Please welcome him to the stage.
Okay, good morning. Thank you very much for coming along for this morning's session. Hopefully everybody had a chance to go along to the keynote this morning, which I thought was fantastic. So just as a bit of background, my name, and firstly I need to apologise, I'm from Australia and my team played in a football grand final on the weekend and I screamed so badly that I can hardly talk anymore. So this is not my normal voice and I'll pause every now and again to have a drink, so you need to kind of put up with this raspy voice for about 30 minutes. That's gone too far. The topic for this morning is really going to be about an agile approach towards cloud adoption. That's better. An agile approach towards cloud adoption. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time this morning talking about what is cloud. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about two key questions. Why public sector agencies are making the move to cloud. And then I'm going to spend the bulk of the session talking about how people are going about doing it. Just as a way of background, I've been with Amazon Web Services for about 12 months now. My role is an executive cloud advisor, which gives me the opportunity to talk to a whole range of public sector agencies, primarily across the federal government landscape in Australia, New Zealand, and hopefully in Singapore. Talk to government agencies that are making the move to cloud. That's what my role is. Before that, though, I was the Deputy Commissioner at the Australian Taxation Office. I was there for 34 years and my primary responsibility when working at the Australian Taxation Office was to help them move to the AWS platform. So for about the last 5 years of my 34-year public service career, I was a customer of AWS and I've spent the last 12 months working with AWS to help customers. So my background, like you, is very much around public sector working life. Okay, let's go to the very, very first question. Why are customers making the move to cloud? And essentially there are 5. And these are not necessarily the only 5 reasons about why we're finding public sector customers embracing cloud, but they are the 5 most common reasons that I find when I work with CIOs, CTOs, head of architecture, head of infrastructure, chief digital officers, etc., etc. 5 key reasons that's got everybody at the moment thinking, I need to do something about cloud. I'll start at the top and work my way through them because they're changing over time. 2, 3, 4 years ago, the key reason about moving to the cloud across the public sector was about trying to save money or cost optimization. The sense that there was an opportunity to be able to make savings in your IT budget. And as a result of that, you could move to the cloud. You had the opportunity to not only make those savings, but then reinvest those savings into your business. So one of the first key drivers was particularly around cost optimization. And we're seeing in that space people starting to think about terms like, I don't really want to own or run my own data center anymore. I want to do some things differently. So a really key driver around cost. That then moved a little bit from not so much about trying to save money, but thinking about how could I use my IT budget more effectively. And we particularly saw some customers who started to think about data analytics. Starting to think about really providing citizen-centric services that could help the way in which our citizens interact with government. And the best way to fund those new investments was by trying to take some advantages of cost optimization in cloud. So we started to move away from just saving money, but starting to think, how could the cloud help us fund the new types of services that our customers wanted? The conversation then moved again, and it started talking about speed and agility and resilience and availability. And for this, and there were some great presentations this morning about what GovTech are doing in terms of helping citizens provide government services. We started to hear the term, we want our government services to be available 24/7. Not just 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday, but starting to think about being highly available, highly resilient, lots of speed, lots of agility. Citizens, particularly across the public sector landscape, now have an expectation that if they want to be able to interact with their government agency, they can do that anytime, any place, on any device. So the driver about why professionals like yourselves were starting to think about cloud was their current IT systems weren't as available or as resilient or as speedy or at scale that they thought they were going to need. And then that leads us to probably the most single important driver about why customers are embracing cloud right now. And that's all really around a broad term called digital transformation. And that was a really strong feature of this morning's keynote presentations. Businesses now realise that it's not just about provisioning infrastructure anymore. It really is about providing highly connected services, not just inside a government agency, but also across government agencies. And we call that the broader digital transformation. And a lot of our CIOs are now starting to turn towards the cloud to help them to be able to do that. Part of this morning's session is to help you build your plan for moving to cloud. The first steps about making that plan are to understand what your key business drivers are, because depending on what your driver is, will shape the way in which you will manage your migration plan. These are the 5 key drivers that we're working with right now. Still very strongly about people wanting to save money. Everybody always wants to save some money, but the conversation has now shifted, not just about what do I get cheaper, but how I actually make my business run more effectively. This is the start of the journey for every customer that I've ever worked with. I call this the spaghetti diagram. It really is intended to be a somewhat ridiculous slide, so I don't think that it's actually real. I didn't take this from a customer. But essentially when people say, I want to make the move to the cloud, they will say, this is what my IT platforms look like. This is the combination of my infrastructure, my applications, my security, my data, my network, etc., etc. And they will often sit back and say, I don't know how, and someone's already nodding their head, which is good. I don't know how to move to the cloud because I've got this. And my first bit of feedback to you would be, you cannot solve this in 30 seconds. You solve this by starting one piece at a time. And for the organisation that I worked at in terms of the Australian Taxation Office, that's about as complicated as we were. We were very, very much like that. So when you're thinking about all the great work that you've done about helping your businesses go forward, you might wake up one day and realise that's what we actually look like. What we want to do is work with you to try to take advantage of this. And this is the slide, you don't need to worry about the detail, but this is the slide that captures all the services that are available on the AWS platform, which goes well beyond just compute and storage. And the compute and storage conversation was very much focused on the economics of cost optimization. But when you look at the raft of services here, contact center, IoT, AI, ML, all of those services are going to play a really important part in helping you over a period of time go from that to that. And I want to stress really importantly, you don't get there in 30 seconds. You've got to start to think about what the right approach is for you to take advantage about those services. But that's the journey about why we think people are starting to have a really strong push towards understanding about the cloud. All right. I've gone one too far. I've gone here, sorry. I want to start talking to you about now, if that's the bit about why, let's start talking about how. So you wake up one day and you think to yourself, I've been at an AWS summit in Singapore and I heard the fantastic Peter Moore speak this morning as part of the keynote address, and you're thinking, how do I actually make that happen? And in our experience, there are 6 key ways, 6 key pathways, if you like. We call them the 6 R's of migration, that our customers are using to make their plans towards moving to cloud. They are retain, retire, rehost, replatform, refactor, and replace. And generally speaking, if you go back to the spaghetti diagram and you understand all the applications that are running in your business and you start to think about the future services that you might want to embrace from the AWS platform, you will need to plot a journey across all 6 of these in some way, shape or form. Small agencies, small government departments might only do 1 or 2. But generally speaking, what we are finding with customers is if you think about all 6, you're going to get a far better migration plan and be able to take advantage of what the AWS platform can give you, linking back to what your business drivers are. Now, so if you take again the spaghetti diagram, you kind of start to think to yourself, how do I go from that spaghetti diagram and take advantage of the AWS platform services? Then what you'll start to do, and you'll see the 6 R's are captured on the screen right now, you'll start to develop pathways. What's the way to rehost? What's the way to replatform, to replace, refactor, retain, and retire? And I want to just kind of highlight a couple of really key points about this. The first of those is the most important thing that you can do is around discovery, which was where we start on the left-hand side of the screen. You've got to understand this is the kind of business that I'm running. We often say to customers, if you want to start thinking about moving to cloud, do you understand how many applications do you currently have? Do you understand what all of your key business needs are? Do you understand what kind of business drivers you want to try and resolve? Do you understand the way in which your infrastructure operates? So it's really important, like all good plans, to start at the left-hand side and to think really strongly about making sure that you understand where you are today so that you can work out which way to go forward. And I'll cover that a little bit more as we go through the session. The second part is you will see 2 of the actual pathways don't go anywhere, particularly around retain and retire. So we don't necessarily find customers at the moment looking to move every single workload or every single application to the cloud. They're actually starting to say to themselves, there are a couple of them, particularly around retain, which means your application stays where it is right now. And certainly some about retire, which is I no longer want to be in that business at all and I need to turn that application off. So the first thing I would say is, while we certainly are seeing customers want to embrace all that they can out of the move to the AWS platform, particularly with those depth and breadth of services, it doesn't mean everything moves. So you've got to start to think to yourself, my plan isn't just about moving to cloud. My plan is about how I transform my business. And the benefit of thinking about retain and retire is it will open your kind of ideas up to different kinds of services that you've never used before and to start to think about those. So one of my key principles about the move is don't think you're going to pick everything up that you have today and move that across. You need to develop your plan. Okay, let's start talking about discovery and think about application assessments. And essentially there are 5 key things that I want you to think about. The first of those is identify your initial migration patterns. Try as much as you can. The initial migration patterns are whether you go down the path of retain, retire, rehost, replatform, etc., etc. It's really important to kind of get a sense of these are the kind of patterns that I want to put in place in my organisation to help me to move to cloud. The second one is, and it gets back to that discovery point of view, we often find customers who say, I have no idea how many applications I have. I have no idea about the way in which my infrastructure works. I can't remember the last time I did an assessment of my network strategy. So it's important to try to implement, if you can, some automated discovery to get a sense of knowing what you have today so that you can start to plan the way forward. And we've got some great AWS products that will help you build up that knowledge base. It's then really important, particularly if you're sitting in the room today as an IT professional, you've got to start engaging key stakeholders, particularly 2 types. Your application development team who own the application, if you like, but also those key business stakeholders in your organisations who are taking advantage of what IT departments can do to help provide services to their customers. I've seen an equal amount of business stakeholders who were really keen about moving towards the cloud and they wanted to go super fast. And sometimes we had to kind of slow them down a little bit. And I've equally seen some business stakeholders who had no idea about the cloud and might have had some misunderstandings or some miseducation about the cloud. So it's really important when thinking about moving from the spaghetti to the way forward to engage those key stakeholders. You need to develop very specific migration plans and designs for the way in which those patterns get implemented. And then what you've also got to come up with at the end is start to schedule some migration phases. As I talked about before, you don't go to bed on a Friday night in your on-premise data center and then wake up on Monday morning in the cloud. You need to plan the way in which you do that. And good planning really does start with good discovery. Have a think about what are the patterns that I want to have going forward, and then what are the ways in which I can understand as much as I can about my business to work that way through. So, having gone through that, we're still focused on how. Let's have a talk about the 6 R's. And funnily enough, I always start with retain, which might seem somewhat ironic given that what I do is help customers move to the cloud or move to AWS, but I always start with retain. Haven't done one single application assessment with a customer yet that didn't have at least one workload that stayed where it was. There's always one. It will be some old application that hardly anybody uses, or has particularly got some degree of kind of unsupported operating system or an application, or there might not be any really good business justification to actually move it. And when you start on your cloud journey, you kind of want to start with things that are going to make a difference. So one of the first strategies that we say is, what do you need to retain? What I would also say is, don't lose sight of the second part of the top banner, and that is make sure you come back to it. Because there might not be a very good reason to move that application to the cloud today, but there will be in 12 or 18 months' time. It might be a particular bespoke application that's got a proprietary software license attached to it, and you just don't think it's quite ready to be able to move because you've kind of been locked into the way in which that works. I have no problems at all about encouraging and making the decision to retain that for a period of time, but don't lose sight about the revisit. And the single biggest mistake I see, or biggest challenge I see customers making is they will decide to leave an application there and then never come back to it. And then what you're going to get is confronted with a lot of technical debt. All of a sudden, workloads will start moving to cloud. You've had these workloads that you want to actually retain and revisit, but you don't do the revisit bit, and then all of a sudden you're starting to run 2 systems. You're running your new cloud services and you're running your old technical debt or legacy systems. So retain has its place, but it also only has its place provided you've got a strategy to be able to revisit that decision and then work out where it goes to next. Generally speaking, for me, the retain and revisit should lead to a decision to retire. I haven't worked with one customer yet that hasn't had at least a number of duplicate applications, or as part of their discovery process, they realise that they've got 10 or 15 applications that nobody understands why they have them or who uses them, or the only people using them are 4 or 5, particularly business stakeholders, and some of those applications actually don't even help out our customer services. Everybody always has to rationalise their applications. So I always think where you've got duplicated resources due to mergers, or you've got that server that's sitting under someone's desk, or you've got already in place a strong decommissioning process, the first place, once you go through retain and revisit, it should lead you then to retire. And you want to actually rationalise your applications. Because the more applications that you're managing, the more IT overhead you're going to need to have in place to be able to manage those. So interestingly enough, when it comes to a migration strategy, you're thinking about how do I build a plan to migrate to AWS? The first conversation I start with is, okay, let's talk about retain and retire. Let's work out what's going to stay there, and then that way we don't waste our initial energy on working on applications that aren't going to move. And then the second thing we focus on is, so what do we need to actually retire? Because what you get left with then are the applications and the workloads that you think are genuinely going to add business value. That's what you get left with, and then you can start to plan. All right, here's the most common strategy across, and I primarily work in Australia and New Zealand. I do a little bit of work across Asia. Here is the single most common strategy adopted by anybody who moves to cloud. It's called the lift and shift. You pick up a bunch of applications. You don't really do much work in terms of re-architecting or re-platforming those applications, and they've got an ability to be able to move those really easily across to AWS. And by and large, every customer starts here. When I was at the ATO, this was the only place I started for the first 12 months. All I focused on was re-hosting as many workloads as I could. Most customers will start with development and test workloads before they start with production workloads, and they move those across. And it's a really simple strategy. It's actually almost, I would say, most customers are genuinely surprised how many applications can be hosted on AWS quite quickly. They're always really surprised. They'll think, oh no, I won't have many workloads that can be easily moved across to their platform, and they can. So this is the most common place to start. And I would encourage, if you're sitting there thinking about how do I build my plan for moving towards the cloud, I would start here too. I would start here, but I'd say a couple of things about that. The first thing about rehosting is this is the best way to start to build the right skills and training and culture of your organisation, because you learn by doing when you start to move to the cloud. So by rehosting applications, you might not get the strongest level of business benefit first go, but what we will get is if you've got staff that have done some AWS training, if you've got the ability to be able to start to introduce some of the AWS features as part of a rehost, and you can, it's not a 100% lift and shift. There are some additional benefits that we can bring in. But what you will see is your staff will get some valuable experience in how you actually operate in cloud. And that's the single most important thing that you get out of a rehosting. In my experience in the ATO, by moving the development and test workloads across, there were some really good cost optimization savings that I could achieve as well. I was able to decommission some old infrastructure in a data center and take advantage of the consumption pay-as-you-go model that AWS brought. But the real benefit was staff who wanted to work in cloud, who'd gone on AWS training and wanted to start to develop their applications or develop their programs using cloud. Rehost gave them a way to be able to gain that experience. It's a really safe way to start, and it's a really good platform to build. So the challenge about rehost is that if you only focus on rehost, those benefits won't be as strong as what they can be. So it's a bit like the old one about retain and revisit. Right? My feedback would be, as you're starting to think about rehost opportunities, don't think that the journey ends there. Think that the journey starts there. Because what we do encourage a lot of our customers to do, once you have rehosted an application, is then start to think about how do I optimise that workload for cloud. That gets us into the next one, which is replatform. Most times what it will involve is changing the operating system or the database platform, or giving you an opportunity to be able to upgrade to the latest release of an application. And more customers are now starting to start with replatform in conjunction with rehosting. Okay? So they're starting to think about things like, and let's kind of go back to some of those business drivers that we talked about earlier. When I rehost, generally customers are focused on cost optimization, or by being able to generate some savings. The replatform opportunity starts us to move down the business drivers and think about scale, think about agility. We're particularly around a lot of our customers when they replatform introduced auto-scaling to help them be able to have their application size depending on what a key business event is. You'll also start to get some really strong inputs now around resilience and availability. I want to move my application to the cloud, but at the moment, unless I start to make some changes to that application, I can't take full advantage of what the cloud gives me. And I need to take full advantage of what the cloud gives me. So if I think about, for example, some customers who've moved their websites across to the cloud, some of those customers follow a rehost, but some of those customers whose websites also include transactions, so it's not just about gaining information out of the website, it can also be about transacting with their government department, are looking for the replatform opportunities. This is where you go from being primarily in rehost and infrastructure shift, and now you're starting to think about infrastructure and application and business coming together. You might have some key stakeholders in your organisation who've been frustrated about whether a service is only available Monday to Friday and needs to be available on a weekend, or they're concerned about your inability to be able to patch that application as much as what it wants to be. You can start to introduce some key cloud features right now in a replatform that can start to drive those deeper business benefits than just economics. You'll start to work your way down resilience, availability. The application will run on a weekend. If all of a sudden there's a major event, and particularly for those organisations who are running websites where all of a sudden there might be a natural disaster, or if there's some key customer event that requires a number of people to log on instantly, we're seeing customers use the replatform to be able to introduce agility and scale that they always wanted to have. So don't just think about a lift and shift. And in some cases, our customers give us feedback that maybe lift and shift makes it a little bit too simple. Start to think about, okay, these are the ones that I can lift, these are the ones that I can shift. These are probably medium-term workloads where I want to be able to move that to the cloud, but I need to do a little bit of work with my application teams to be able to make that happen. This is the one that's going to take a little bit of planning. And you've probably got to be thinking about the 3 to 6 month workload, whereas a rehost can often be achieved inside the first 1 to 3 months. Okay? Make sure you start to factor this one in. Then there's the big one. Has anyone heard the term cloud native? This is where you actually start to make the move to take advantage of the full features of your AWS cloud platform, and we call this refactoring. And this will be, by and large, a complete change of the way in which the application operates. Essentially, we bring across system data, and then we kind of rebuild the application to be able to deliver the services consistent with what's now fully available on the platform. This is the one that takes a bit of time. When I started at the ATO, this was the one I never even thought about. I sat there and thought, I'm just going to worry about rehosting. I did a little bit of replatforming, but I thought to myself, I just haven't got the ability when I first started to be able to find the application teams who had the availability to be able to refactor the application to work on cloud. But this is where every customer gets to sooner or later. There's a lot of great benefits that you'll get out of rehosting. There's even more benefits that you'll get out of refactoring, but the most significant benefits that you get to the business are when you adopt the refactor one. And not every application, as we said before, think about the 6 R's, not every application in your business will need to be refactored. But you want to take advantage of the cloud native services that AWS offer. This is where significant business benefit is given. But this is also the one that requires that really strong cohort of IT, business, application owners, customers, all coming together to think themselves to saying, the application that I've currently have, it's a bit like a house that's been built on and built on and built on over time. I can't keep building on that house anymore. I need to go back to scratch and start again. And in that situation, you are going to need some time to be able to get that right. But this is the one that brings the most significant benefit. This is the one that requires the most detailed analysis through the discovery phase of the workloads that you think, I just need to do some deeper work here than what I might have had to do with my other applications. Okay. More and more now customers, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, as I said before, customers were pushing this one to the side. They wanted to start with a rehost and a replatform, some great skills in terms of their staff who've done some AWS training, get the ball rolling about moving to cloud, build up some confidence that workloads can move, start to see what those benefits are. But more and more now customers are actually starting with 2 swim lanes. These are the workloads that I can move quite quickly through a rehost and replatform, but these are the applications that I know sooner or later I need to refactor those to be able to operate in cloud, and they're starting on those at the same time. So one of the key recommendations I do make to our customers is start working on these ones now. Don't just only work on the refactor applications, but try to make sure that you're not pushing that so far to the side that you never ever get to it. The last one of the 6 R's is replace. If I had my time again, I would move this option up to the front with retain and retire, because replace is really now becoming, in the conversations that I have, probably the 3rd discussion that I have with customers. And this is the SaaS option, where there's an ability now to take advantage of a cloud native like application that actually has already been developed by an external third party to run on the cloud, and you can take full advantage of that by introducing that into your business. Now, this is traditionally called a SaaS offering or a off-the-shelf COTS product, and very much now around making sure that when you do buy a SaaS or a COTS product, that what you're buying is a cloud-compatible software license so that you can take full advantage of all of the benefits around consumption-based models that exist on the AWS platform. But SaaS is really important right now. If I think back again, the example with the ATO, the one application when we first did our application discovery phase, which I think was in about 2015, the one application that we absolutely drew a line through and said we could never move that to cloud was SAP. It would almost be the first application that I moved now, because SAP on AWS is a fantastic solution. But 3 years ago, I didn't have that option available to me. And this is really also that example of, as an IT area, what are the applications that you're currently managing that you don't really want to be in the business of managing anymore because somebody else does that better. Think about Salesforce. There's a great company in Australia called Technology One who are offering some great SaaS services. So SaaS is a really important part of your roadmap. It's almost like somebody else has done the hard work for you. Now, we've got to move away from that kind of model where everybody wants to customise their own application to suit the own needs of their own organisation. Everybody's done that. But there are some really great opportunities now by embracing a SaaS option. And as you can start to see, your migration towards the cloud has got some applications staying. It's got some applications being turned off. It's got some moving quite quickly to start to build momentum. It's got some that you need to do a little bit of work to take advantage of the cloud, but you don't want to over-invest on those applications because the business benefits that you can get through a re-platform are enough. You've probably got some critical workloads that are going to need some significant refactoring, so you put a couple into that migration pathway, and you'll also take advantage of SaaS. And as you're working your way through that discovery phase and developing that migration plan, customers who've invested across all of the 6 Rs are getting the full benefits of the AWS platform quicker than what people who aren't considering all of those are. I see a lot of customers who did a really strong lift and shift, and that was fantastic. But sooner or later, they knew they were going to have to go back and do some refactoring or some replacing options. So the sooner that you can kind of think about all 6 of those streams, the better your migration plan to cloud is going to be. You're going to realise the benefits much quicker. I wanted to give you a couple of key takeaways. First of those is you can reduce the risk about them. Everyone says, okay, I want to migrate to the cloud, but what are the great risks? You can really reduce the risk through tools, planning and process, particularly an application discovery tool, and particularly by making sure that you understand as much as you can about your current IT platforms. Go back to that spaghetti diagram and really understand as much about that as you can. The second one is, I call this terms a migration factory. You need to build a capability inside your organisation that can help you migrate to cloud. And it's not just a tool, and it's not just process, it's really importantly about people. Okay, one of the very first things that I say to anybody who's thinking about moving to cloud is, there's some great AWS training that's available for your staff. Find those people inside your organisation that have wanted to work in cloud. They probably already are working in cloud to some degree. Get those people involved in your migration planning. Give those people some training, and then let them start to understand where some initial quick wins might be about a rehosting. But you need to build up a capability of people who actually want to move to cloud and are starting to drive those conversations forward inside your organisation. The third one is, and this is one of the great benefits about the AWS platform, you've got to learn from others. Everyone has the benefit now of not being the first person moving to cloud. Thousands of customers across the world have moved to cloud. People like me who started their cloud journey 4 or 5 years ago will often talk to you about all the things we did wrong, not all the things that we did right. And the great advantage about that is, particularly with the AWS platform, is you get the benefit of all those learnings. So talk to as many people as you possibly can. So many things I wish I had have done differently. And the good thing about that is, while I can't go back and fix the things I would have done differently at the ATO, my role is to share those learnings with you so that your cloud journey can take advantage of what everybody else has done beforehand. All right? I can't stress enough the importance of good planning, good discovery, understand what your business drivers are, start to think about building a migration factory, and then realise there are hundreds of people who are out there ready to help. And our job at AWS is to try to help you make that migration as smooth as it possibly can. I wanted to think, though, about, if I was to leave you with a couple of key points, what would be the 5 things that I would do to take action? So I talked before about the fact that I've been involved in a fairly significant move at the Australian Taxation Office to cloud. If I could give you a bit of advice and say, what would be 5 things that I would tell you to go and do? And none of these, funnily enough, need to be in order. They're just 3 or 4 or 5 years experience now working in the cloud program. What would I say to you? If you think about these things, you're going to start to build a really good plan. The first one is build some executive sponsorship. I know it sounds really simple that you need to have someone inside your organisation that champions the way in which you're going to go forward for cloud. And we all wish that we had that person available each and every day. When you have strong executive sponsorship, you keep going forward. When you don't, you don't. And I've got some great customers right now who maybe 12 to 18 months ago were significantly going forward at speed and at pace to move to the cloud. And then all of a sudden those key executive sponsors left the organisation and they almost take a few steps backwards. So it's really important to get strong executive sponsorship of what you want to do about cloud. And I would link that back to business outcomes. If the key business challenge that you're trying to resolve about moving to cloud is freeing up capacity in a data centre, then you're going to want to talk to the key business stakeholders who are impacted by that decision and get them to sponsor the way in which you go forward. A really good example is if one of your drivers is cost optimisation, I always encourage people to talk to the Chief Financial Officer. Go and talk to finance. Go and talk to the people that control the money. Get those people on board. If one of your worries is around security, go and talk to your Chief Security Officer. Get them to understand the shared security model of AWS. Get them to become people who are helping you rather than hindering you. Okay, so it's really important to get strong executive sponsorship. I often start every conversation with a customer by wanting to meet the person who's driving the program forward. Who's the person who's helping you implement your cloud program? Second one is build some really strong cloud foundations. And you can do this before you even think about what workload's going to move. You can start to think about a landing zone. You can start to think about the commercial frameworks for the way in which you want to buy and use cloud services. You can start to think about training your people. You can start to think about the key business processes around the way in which you want to govern and manage your cloud. There's lots of things you're going to do before you even think about finding the workload to move that will help you that when the time comes to be ready, you'll be ready. Okay? Run some pilots. Pilots really help you. Particularly if you want to start with a lift and shift, rehost, dev and test workloads, you can start to run some pilots. Pilots will help you learn by doing. Once you start to learn by doing, you'll build that cloud centre of excellence. People, process and tools, but most importantly, people. Get some people who want to work on your cloud program, bring those into your IT organisation, make sure they've got the right culture, make sure they've got the right attitude, and they'll help to take your business forward. And then review your application landscape and link that application landscape to the 6 Rs. You are going to need to do that at some point of time, and I would always encourage people to start with number 5 as soon as you possibly can. But if you've got 1, 2, 3 and 4 in place, 5 becomes a lot easier. I wanted just to give you an example here. These are delivering outcomes on AWS, so I can show these slides because I was actually the person who helped lead that. On the left-hand side is the ato.gov.au website. On the right-hand side is your ability to download an application on your smartphone and complete your tax return using your smartphone. And all of that runs on AWS. And interestingly enough, by and large, the first part of that was a rehost, a lift and shift. We picked up the website, we picked up some of the online services and moved those over to the AWS platform. I'm working with the ATO now as a member of the AWS to re-platform and re-architect that right now. It's a really good example of workloads that started with a rehosting, got some benefits around cost, got some benefits around savings, got some benefits around availability. But when we started to think about being available 24/7 all the time to be able to use your smartphone to lodge your tax return, the ATO now realises they have to start to move towards re-architecting, and that's where we are right now. Just a couple of really good examples of people that have gone across the whole 6. And that, I'm getting wound up the back. When I start talking, I just keep going until 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. I thought I had 3 or 4 hours. No, this is an outrage. Okay, so that covers it. My name is Craig Fox. I'm a Cloud Executive Advisor for Professional Services. It's important to start to think about what can we do to help you build your application plan to move to the cloud. I've been a customer. I'm now on the AWS side of the fence. Cloud is certainly going to help you take your business forward. Anything that we can do to help, we will. Please enjoy the rest of the summit. If anyone wants to stay back and have an individual conversation, I'm more than happy to. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Cheers.
Thank you, Craig. If you have any questions about this session, you can find Craig or any of the AWS architecture team at the AWS booth. Remember that we would love your feedback. Scan the QR code to have a say about this session and stand to win a limited edition swag from us. Thank you.
If you'd like to receive a copy of the content from this session, we're available at the front of the room.